You are now listening to Protecting Your Nest with board-certified family medicine and obesity medicine specialist Dr. Tony Hampton. For more, visit drtonyhampton.com. Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. Today we will talk about longevity, a topic that is dear to my heart because the majority of us really want to be here as long as possible with our friends and family. In fact, when I created my Protecting Your Nest podcast and YouTube channel, one of my primary goals was to help all of my friends and family and the people who follow me achieve metabolic health so that not only would you have a great quality of life, but you'd be able to enjoy that quality of life for a very long time. Our focus on this podcast has always been that one of the best ways to achieve metabolic health and longevity is by using lifestyle as the key. But with science continuing to evolve, are there other innovations that could benefit us as we pursue longevity? And if so, what are they and how can those innovations be incorporated into our lives? Today's guest will provide some insights I feel will help you achieve your longevity goals. Today's guest is Chris Mirabile. Chris graduated from New York University Stern School of Business and later won his business plan competition with his startup company, Hotlist, a location-based social network that scaled to 220 million people social plans. Chris has launched multiple successful technology ventures and has interest in health, which began at the age of 12 and evolved into a passion after he was cured from a brain tumor at the young age of 16. He's done research and he's integrated longevity practices into his life and has achieved a biological age 13.6 years younger than his chronological age, according to epigenetic tests. And with that, Chris, I appreciate you and I welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you making a video short where we talked a little bit about, which dietary pattern was better for longevity. I definitely want to make sure we share that with the folks who check out this podcast. And I do want to get started. You actually were kind of at New York University and you were kind of around a lot of finance people. And then you decided to go into being an entrepreneur. I have two kids, both who went to Washington University in St. Louis, one who has graduated in business, the other who is graduating next year, and they both minored in entrepreneurship. So my question for you, Mr. Entrepreneur, what advice would you give my boys as they kind of start their journey in the entrepreneur space?
I would say start simple. So we always have these big, grand visions, and it's really healthy and important to have a big, grand vision. But don't put the cart before the horse, right? So one thing that I learned in the technology space is the concept of MVPs, minimal viable products. Try to create the simplest version of your concept, your idea as possible, and then put it out there for the world to experience, for potential customers, for people to start interacting with and giving you feedback on. And then take an iterative approach. Just very quickly start iterating, hearing what people are saying and making adaptations, and collect data and see, am I getting better or am I getting worse? And continually correct. And when you take that type of approach, you go from concept and you have this vision that's way far out. But that's the best way, in my experience, to actually realize that vision is to just be very quick, nimble, iterative, rely on data, and create an MVP and take that type of approach. Eventually, things start to come together and either the revenue comes in or you attract the investors or both. And then that's when you start scaling. But again, still maintaining the discipline of that.
All right, cool. That makes a lot of sense. I like the, take it slow, make it small, but listen to your audience. I just think, the people who are going to buy the product or the service, we need to hear what they need. And so I like that advice. I will make sure they listen to this part of the podcast for sure. So I appreciate
Great.
that. Now, when it comes to you going into this longevity space, I love the idea of longevity. I think everybody should. But what inspired you to get into the longevity space?
So, as you mentioned, I got interested in health when I was 12 years old. I picked up an issue of Men's Health magazine. I started exercising and eating what I thought was a healthy diet at the time. I've since learned a lot. But when I was 16 years old, I was suddenly stopped when I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. I had a seizure. I was rushed to the emergency room. I got a CAT scan and then a bunch of MRIs, and they found a golf ball sized tumor by my left temporal lobe. And they had to do emergency surgery. And, a very long story made short is that I spent a lot of time contemplating life, thinking about the topic of mortality, thinking about how short life is, the impact I wanted to have on the world, the experiences I wanted to have in life, and so on. And I found that, at least for me, entrepreneurship was my calling. That was a way that I could actually make the biggest impact on the world as possible by creating things that people want and ideally will then also help them. And it also planted the seed in my head where it was basically an evolution of my concept of health. Whereas when I was 12 years old, my idea was it was more superficial. I wanted to be attractive to the girls in school and to do well in sports, and that's what most young people think of as health. And then as you get to a later stage in life, maybe 40s, 50s, 60s, you start realizing that health is more complex. It's biological health, it's disease and avoidance of disease. But I realized that when I was 16. And so that seed was planted in my subconscious mind. And so as I would then continue on my journey of experimenting, biohacking, so on and so forth, I was always asking the question, is this good for me, not only for my short-term goal, but for my long-term health? And the answer was not always clear. And so I didn't know it at the time, but that was the beginning of a longevity perspective, which about 10 years ago, I came across a paper in a prestigious journal known as Cell, which had the seminal paper known as Hallmarks of Aging, which talked about the 9 biological root causes of aging. And that was my moment of epiphany. It was the aha moment where I realized this is what I've been searching for all of this time, is an explanation for why we get older and why disease takes place in the first place. And then I can now use that to work backwards to try to reduce the damage to these causes. And long story short, that's eventually what evolved into my company, Novos.
That's cool. And definitely want to touch on some of those 9 elements. I want to also maybe just to level set, understanding the difference between biological and chronological aging may be
Sure.
helpful. I'm sure that's not obvious to everybody. So maybe speak to that a
Sure.
little bit.
So chronological age is obvious. It's how many birthdays you've had. It's how long you've been alive on this planet for. But biological age is essentially how old your body is biologically. So some people age faster than others and some people slower. We can see this superficially. If you see somebody who's 70 years old, but you say, oh, they look like they're 60 or 58. And then you see someone who's 70 and it's like, oh, wow, they look like they're practically in the grave already, right? Like that's the difference between the biological age kind of exhibited physically, but it's happening internally biologically as well. In fact, there are ways that researchers have uncovered to be able to measure somebody's biological age by looking at things like the epigenome or um, uh, other other omes or omics, if you will, right? So there's something known as the multiome, which you have your genome, those are your genetics. You have your epigenome, this is which genes are turned on and off. And there are patterns to that which emerge with time and age. And so algorithms have been created to determine how old someone is biologically, which is essentially a measure of their disease risk or morbidity risk and their mortality risk. Because every 6 to 7 years that we age, our risk of death doubles. And we know this. Life insurers, base the pricing of your policy based on your age as one of the markers, right? So if you can reverse or slow down your biological age, you're going to have a lower risk of disease, a lower risk of death. And by extension, you're also going to be more capable, mentally capable, physically capable as you are when you're younger.
That's cool. I think we all want to achieve that, and I think sometimes we're still acting like we were when we were younger, and we want to still look good. And I celebrate 30 years of marriage this year, so hopefully I can still look good for my
Congrats.
wife. So yes, it's been a nice journey.
Did you get married when you were 5? You only look 35.
You're good, man. Yeah, I'm using your product. How about that?
Great,
So,
great.
yeah, it's a good thing. I do wanna ask you also when it comes to, like, um, your product, before we kinda get into it, is it more about reversing aging somehow, or is it more about slowing down aging?
So I want to be very practical about this. It is really the focus we have is on slowing down the rate of aging, the pace at which you're aging. So there's an epigenetic test which is considered the best, scientifically speaking, on the market. It wasn't created by us, though we sell it. It was created by researchers at Duke University and Columbia University, called DunedInPACE, and it measures the rate at which you're aging every year. So a 1 would be 1 biological year per chronological year. Anything below that is you're aging slower than the average person each year. So our goal as a company is to help you to get that pace of aging as low as possible. Now, can someone reverse their biological age? Well, yes, technically they can. But what does that really mean? Like my biological age is almost 14 years younger than my chronological age. I'm 39 years old, and my biological age is about 25 years old or so. I don't look 25. I know I don't look 25, but what it means is my morbidity risk, my mortality risk, and my ability to physically perform and mentally perform is that of someone significantly younger. So I wouldn't take it too literally in
Mhm.
terms of the biological age, but I would look at it more in terms of what I'm saying, in terms of risk factors and capabilities, and trying to lower that number as much as possible.
Cool. You mentioned the 9 mechanisms of aging, and in the context of your product, and I guess I would say the main product, because you have more than one, with your company, could you kinda, I know it's kinda hard to get through all 9, but can you touch on the mechanism of aging and what your product can do to address it? Just as many as
Sure.
you'd like to touch on.
Sure. So there's actually, to add some more complexity to it, there's actually 12 mechanisms now. So about 2 months ago, the original scientists and authors behind that first paper published a new one a decade later, identifying 3 new hallmarks.
Wow.
So those 3 new ones I'll mention very quickly. One is inflammaging. So it's chronic low grade inflammation that comes with aging, and it increases as you get older.
Okay.
We have ingredients in Novos Core, our foundational supplement, like glycine, fisetin, pterostilbene, ginger, microdose lithium, magnesium, and others that address inflammation.
Okay.
The second new one is disabled autophagy. So, autophagy is the process in which our body is basically cleaning up cells and cellular components that are worn out or dead and shouldn't be there anymore, but they kind of litter our tissues. And that starts to become disabled as we get older. It's almost
Mhm.
as if like the garbage trucks are not coming through your neighborhood as often anymore. And so Novos ingredients are glucosamine, or acetylglucosamine, which is a different ingredient, significantly different than
Mhm.
glucosamine. Acetylglucosamine is found in the ingredient hyaluronic acid, which we have in our formula. Fisetin, pterostilbene, and glycine can all help with this. The third one is dysbiosis. So this is your microbiome. It starts to become dysregulated, and as we age, certain species propagate that are harmful to our health and can lead to things like inflammation, for example. And the healthy bacteria, you have fewer of them. And ingredients like ginger and fisetin, rhodiola, pterostilbene improve that. Now, the original 9, I'll go through those quicker, just so that I won't list all of the ingredients unless you care for me to. I'll just mention these hallmarks. So one is mitochondrial dysfunction. This is like the power plants of our cells that convert the food we eat into energy. You have fewer of them and they're less efficient when you age. Cellular senescence. This is when cells turn into a zombie-like state and they start to secrete molecules that cause nearby cells to become zombie-like as well, or senescent. And it increases exponentially as we age. It's one of the reasons our skin becomes wrinkled. Loss of proteostasis. So proteostasis is basically the ability to deal with proteins that would accumulate inside and outside of our cells, and they start to like block the cell and prevent the cell from functioning properly. Altered intercellular communication. So cells communicate with each other. We have this vast, incredibly complex network across all of our cells. And as we age, they have trouble communicating with each other, partly because of the loss of proteostasis, where proteins might be blocking receptor sites. Genomic instability. So that's basically DNA damage. We've all heard about this from UV exposure from the sun or cigarette smoke and pollution. So there's more and more DNA damage that accumulates over time. There's also ways that the body can repair that, but the body's less effective at it as we get older. The next one, this is number 6 of the original 9, is epigenetic alterations. So I mentioned the epigenome before. This is which genes are on and off. It's almost like if your genes are piano keys, your epigenome is the player of that piano. So is it a concerto that's being produced, or is it like a kid just pounding down on the keys, right? Mm-hmm. As you get older, certain keys that should be pressed are not being pressed anymore, and vice versa. Telomere shortening. So telomeres are the end caps of your chromosomes. Your chromosomes contain your DNA, and the telomeres protect the DNA within the chromosomes. Every time there's a cellular division, your telomeres get a little bit shorter. Mm-hmm. If you have a lot of damage to your cells and your DNA, you're going to divide more rapidly, more frequently, and your telomeres are going to shorten quicker. The good news is you can actually extend telomere length with different lifestyle practices. In fact, all of these can be improved with lifestyle practices. Number 8 is deregulated nutrient sensing. So this really should appeal to you, Tony, because this deals with your metabolism, right? Your metabolic health. As you get older, your body does not sense insulin and glucose and cholesterol and lipids and so on as well as when you're youthful, when you're young. And so the result is, for example, higher blood glucose, which can then cause glycation of cells and by extension tissues and organs, and then prevent them from functioning properly, right? And then finally, number 9 is stem cell exhaustion. So stem cells are the cells that are the, you know, how should I put this? The parent of all of our cells, right? Like they generate, they produce all of our cells. The copies are produced from the stem cells, and you have fewer of them as you age. And those that you do have are not making perfect replicas of themselves anymore. And so that becomes an issue. So that's all 12.
That's cool. And that's so your company is basically trying to address all of these areas of aging. So it sounds like it will evolve, but it also sounds like what you've already done addresses those 3 new ones. You kind of already are kind of addressing it, but yeah, calling out inflammation is a no-brainer. Obviously, we need autophagy to kind of clean things up, and obviously dysbiosis. That all makes sense. When I think about benefiting myself, I think about short term and long term. So, man, my brain says, man, if I take a supplement that addresses these issues, that's great. But it'd be nice to see some benefit today. So, from your personal experience, from the people who are using your product, what types of things are they saying about this is helping me? Like I see a difference now.
Sure. So the first thing I'll mention is that we did a case study where we looked at epigenetic clocks, and we administered them to people before taking Novos and then 6 months after taking Novos supplements. And we compared before and after, and we found that we had a reduction in epigenetic pace of aging for 73% of participants. And the 27% that did not have a reduction were static. In other words, they did not accelerate. zero people accelerated in their pace of aging, which I think is almost as notable as the 73% that had the reduction, because you would expect in a random population that some people would speed up their pace of aging because of stressors in their life or over intoxicating or whatever it might be, and it didn't happen with anyone.
Hmm.
So that's something that's happening in as little as 6 months. But to your point, what do people feel? What do people notice? So what I'd say is the most commonly reported short term benefit is an improvement in mood. So people feel more calm while taking Novos Core in particular. Why? Well, we have different ingredients that have been found to improve people's mood and reduce stress, for example. So that's everything from microdose lithium, and I'll mention that it is a microdose. Prescription doses are 50, 100 times higher than this. These are doses that we would have historically throughout evolution consumed in well water or in our natural food supply. But
Hmm.
everything is filtered now and we don't get it in our diet. And there are studies that find that people with small amounts of lithium in their food and water supply have lower rates of Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, and even lower rates of murder, suicide, and rape, and so on. So overall, it's mood stabilizing. It helps people very much. Magnesium, L-theanine, these are some ingredients that improve mood. Another benefit is improvements to skin health. So this usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks,
Hmm.
and it's not going to be this like crazy dramatic change. Uh, it's not like getting Botox or something, right? But
Right.
people commonly say that people are complimenting them on their complexion. That something looks better. They look more hydrated, like fine lines are not as pronounced, and so on. And there's a number of ingredients in Novos to explain those effects. Another commonly reported benefit is improvements in energy. And I believe that that would be a combination of a couple of things. One is just direct impacts on like metabolic health, for example, and mitochondrial health. These are going to be helping you produce energy, but then also improvements in sleep. So those same ingredients I mentioned that improve your mood also happen to keep you calmer and
Hmm.
sleeping better. And if you're sleeping better, we all know we feel that much better with more energy the next day. So I think they all go kind of hand in hand with each other, but those are the most commonly reported short term benefits.
That's cool. And for those who hear things like microdoses of lithium, that could be a little intimidating, but most of this stuff comes from Earth, the Earth, right? It's like,
All of it does.
I think,
Everything that we
right.
have comes from nature
That's
or
right.
is in the human body already.
Yeah,
Everything.
so people and a lot of drugs do too, but I just want to put that out there so people won't, panic who are trying to be natural. It's all coming from the earth. Now, having said that, there are I assume there's other longevity companies out there who are, trying to have a similar vision of providing longevity supplementation for people who are seeking it. What's going on with your company compared to these other companies? Why would people choose your company over the others?
Great question. So let's categorize longevity companies or anti aging companies into two buckets. One is the traditional anti aging company, which I would say they are not clued into the latest science and they are working with outdated assumptions that, for example,
Mhm.
antioxidants are going to slow down aging, when we actually find that many antioxidants can actually accelerate
Yeah,
aging,
right.
right? So anti-aging companies, generally speaking, are not up with the latest research, and they're not doing anything for longevity. Then you have newer companies that are now popping up, many of which are following our lead with focusing on the hallmarks of aging. We were the first company to design a company around and formulations around the idea of addressing all of the hallmarks simultaneously. Others are trying to do the same. What I'd say is different is, first of all, we have a patent pending formulation. We formulated with a team of 6 world class scientists from Harvard, MIT, and the Salk Institute. Our formulation is based on more than 400 scientific studies, which you can find at novoslabs.com/evidence. Or if you search the website for evidence, you'll find it. we have also done our own studies with independent labs, that is,
Hmm.
of our formulation. So both in vitro and in vivo human studies. In vitro studies, for example, we administered our formulations to human cells, and then we irradiated them. And we found that the damage to DNA caused from irradiation was reduced by more than 70% in the cells that had Novos administered compared to those that didn't. In another study we haven't published yet, because we're doing follow-up studies with it, is administering chemotherapeutics to human keratinocytes, which are skin cells. And we found that the chemotherapeutics typically have very, very harsh uh, impacts on DNA, single and double strand breaks to the DNA. And we found very significant reductions in those DNA strand breaks. I mentioned with the case study, we've done a skin health study in humans. We're doing clinical trials. So we're really being accountable with our formulations. Most other companies are really just marketing something. They slap together ingredients that are popular in the longevity space and then try to market it, but they can't get a patent for it, and they're not investing the resources into proving it out. What I'd finish with is uh, two last points. One is that we, as a company, are not simply selling supplements, we're selling a solution. We
Mm.
provide epigenetic tests, which you can measure your pace of aging, like I said before. You can measure your telomere length all in one kit. Or if that's not within your budget, we also offer free at home tests and free knowledge and guidance for things that you can do that don't cost you a cent to improve your longevity. Because the second point is, we're a public benefit corporation. So I founded Novos uh, intentionally as a PBC, where I can do things for the public interest that are not necessarily the best for our bottom line. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean that we aren't for profit. We are. We have to be accountable. Let's be honest. But at the same time, I have the power to be able to do things that are good, that's good for the public, even if it costs us more money than it otherwise would. And I'm doing this because I think that longevity needs to be accessible for everyone. I was impacted by a brain tumor. I lost my mother to pancreatic cancer. There are many people that can't afford all of the things that we're currently selling, although eventually, hopefully, we can have less expensive products as well. But we need to make this accessible for everyone, and I think that that's a fundamental difference too.
Well, considering I'm a big fan of social determinants of health and all the barriers that prevent people from achieving their health related goals, I think it is important that we, as we kind of put on our philanthropy hat, always think about our neighbors, always make things accessible, because that's just the right thing to do. And it's probably the most rewarding thing we can do as well. So I appreciate that you guys are focused in that area as well. We talked about, when we did our video short for YouTube, we talked about nutrition. You kind of, spoiler alert, you kind of lean towards Mediterranean for longevity. And I gave my 2 cents about, more low carb. But having said that, I have a NEST acronym, and it has nutrition, exercise, less stress, more sleep, how we think, recovering from trauma. But I want to kind of touch on that a little bit. And I want to speak to how lifestyle is also important in longevity. So we've talked about nutrition, but your thoughts, let's start with fasting. How important has that been in terms of helping people with longevity?
So I think it really, first of all, comes down to who the person is that is fasting.
Hmm.
So if this person is obese, for example, or even mildly overweight, I think fasting is going to do significantly more for them than somebody who is at 8% body fat and super fit. In
Yeah.
fact, somebody who is that fit, which tends to ironically be the person who's the most excited about fasting, right? The go-getters, the alpha personalities, and so on, it's going to benefit them the least, and it might even harm them hormonally. The benefits that we see in animal studies are not typically with these super fit mice. It's usually
Yeah.
with the overweight ones. So I would start with saying that somebody who is already in a negative metabolic state, they're going to benefit tremendously from these extended periods of fasting. Of course, with doctor supervision, to be careful.
Hmm.
You don't want to be deficient in minerals, for example, during that time. You want to be properly hydrated. You want to make sure there's no medical conditions that would restrict them from a prolonged fast. But it's fantastic for them. And the same goes for time restricted feeding, which people oftentimes also call intermittent fasting, though they're technically slightly different. So having like this eating window, this small eating window of maybe 6 hours out of the day, or 4 hours
Mhm.
out of the day, or 8 hours out of the day. Anything below 12 hours is ideal. And it seems
Mhm.
that the shorter you get is better, up to a certain limit. You don't want to only have one meal a day, for example, which I know some people do, but it's very hard to get adequate nutrients and caloric intake and so on with just one meal a day. So I would typically recommend 2 to 3 meals a day, ideally within about an 8 hour window, and biased more towards the beginning of the day rather than
Mhm.
towards the end of the day, because the
Yep.
beginning of the day is when our metabolism is in its best state. We're most insulin sensitive, for example, in the morning compared to the evening.
That's cool. So I don't over exercise. I exercise a couple of times a day, high intensity, and then I take a break. And that works better for my schedule. And plus, it doesn't take as much time. Now, having said that, in from a longevity perspective, where does exercise fit on that spectrum from what you've learned?
So again, we have to consider the individual and what they're willing and capable of doing, capable in terms of physically capable or mentally capable and willing, right? So what I would say is that at the bare absolute minimum, you want to do 150 minutes of brisk walking per week. That's about 23, say 25, we'll round up 25 minutes per day of brisk walking. And when I say brisk walking, it should be at the rate where you're getting winded trying to talk to somebody.
Hmm.
It's Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule. It's not exactly that, but it's kind of like the minimum investment for a maybe 60% benefit
Hmm.
for health outcomes, for like cardiovascular risk and disease risk and so on. So that's the bare minimum that everyone should be doing every day. But then you get into people who are looking to be the maximizers. And what I say to those people is you don't want to do too much. For example, marathoning and doing Tour de France. I mean, that's causing
Right.
more harm to your biology in your organism than something that's a little bit more moderate. For example, uh, I'll tell you what I do personally. I try to maximize my longevity as much as possible. I'll do 3 days of weightlifting a week and 3 days of cardio. And of those three
Hmm.
days of cardio, I try to do high intensity at least for two of them, or I mix in high intensity within two of them. All of my workouts are under an hour. And I also spend a good amount of walking. So I bookend my days with walking. So I start my day in the sunlight, either on a phone call or listening to a podcast in the morning, walking for about 35, 40 minutes. I do the same at the end of my day. And then I also in the morning do a sub 1 hour workout, typically about 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think about I have an older population I see. So if you come to my lobby, you may see people really between the ages of I'd say 55 and 100. Uh, yes, I'm a family doctor, but I'm not taking care of the babies anymore. I'm not delivering babies, but what I find is that if I can just get people moving in any way, that's really a huge step. And for them, if they haven't been moving at all, even non-brisk walking is great. But then you're right, walking is a phenomenal way to exercise. People underestimate, and if you haven't been exercising, take a 30-minute walk and see what happens. You're gonna feel it. It's just that you're thinking it's nothing, but it's a lot. So I really appreciate starting there, particularly when I think about my population. And with my seniors, I want to make sure they kind of ease into this safely. The good news is if you really get into exercise, you can be a bodybuilder at 80 if you want to. I mean, there's
You
no
could.
limit to what the body can do. So I think that's really important. Uh, Real quick, let's just touch on stress and sleep. I know that those things are important. When I get my sleep, I feel so much better. When I don't let people bug me and I'm not stressed, I feel so much better. So, any thoughts on those two things?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, that to your point about not letting people bug you, you feel better. I would say that when you have better sleep, fewer people bug you, right?
True. I like that.
If
That's
yeah,
right.
I think a lot of it actually starts from sleep. When you sleep
Yeah.
well, you are less irritable, you're more calm, you're less stressed, you're more focused, and less distracted. There's so many good things that come from that sleep. Now, if you get stressed, it then becomes harder to sleep, and it can become this negative loop. So ideally, though, you are prioritizing your sleep, because if you are, you're less likely to get to that point of high stress in the first place. Now, if you do get to that point of high stress, there are things you can do like meditation or prayer or journaling, or talking it out with somebody. A number of different things, even going to the gym to the point of exercise. Many different ways to relieve that stress. But overall, I would say make your sleep into this disciplined practice. For me, that's where it all begins, is making sure I'm getting enough sleep, turning sleep into a ritual where maybe an hour or so before I dim the lights, or I actually have color changing lights where I can change the bulbs to red at night. And this helps to entrain my circadian rhythm. So when I put my head on the pillow, I have an Aura ring that tracks my sleep. I fall asleep within 5 minutes most nights, and I sleep through the night, and I wake up without an alarm. I have the alarm just in case,
Yeah.
but 99 out of 100 days I'm waking up without an alarm. And if stressors do come, and believe me, as an entrepreneur, they come almost on a
Yes.
daily basis, uh, I can cope with them. I feel in control. And in the few times where I have poor sleep, those stressors feel so much more difficult to overcome.
All right, cool. I totally agree. And I like the fact you're kinda learning and you're trying to hack, you're using your ring to kinda figure out what's going on. And I think collecting data and understanding what's going on with our bodies is so important. It's like a little bit of an experiment, and I really appreciate that. When I went to your, website, I noticed that if I click on shop, you have different types of products. So I think it's important for people who may decide to invest in these products, what's the difference between them? So maybe we can start with the core product. Who would get that versus the boost product versus the age product? So
Sure.
talk a little bit about what the differences are.
Sure. So Novos Core is the product we're most proud of, because that is the patent pending formulation that we spent a lot of time and research on, that I was talking before about, for example, 400 scientific studies and the scientific advisory board team and so on. That is, if people were to choose one single product, that should be the product people are purchasing. I actually have it right here. You can see it's this box. Within it, there are these individual sachets, or
Mhm.
packets that you tear open and you pour them into your water. We have orange flavored, 0 calories, and then we have unflavored, which if you don't like orange, you can mix it into a smoothie or a yogurt. It doesn't taste good on its own in water, but if you
Mhm.
combine it with something else, you don't taste it. Uh, and so this though is uh, less affordable than Novos Boost, because it's got almost 7 grams of active ingredients in it. When you look at most supplements, they've got like 500 milligrams or maybe 1 gram. This
Mhm.
is 7 grams of expensive ingredients. And so we're not taking very high margins on the product. We're delivering it as affordably as we can. But that basically means that the price ranges between $79 for a subscription up to $109 for a month, for a one-time purchase. So
Mhm.
$79 would be for a month supply. Novos Boost, by contrast, is something that ideally you're taking in addition to Novos Core. It's a booster. It's something that, when combined, makes it even more powerful. And this
Mhm.
is for the person that wants it all. They will combine both. But what I would say is that somebody who needs an entry level product and can't afford Novos Core yet, but wants to get involved in longevity supplements, we would recommend Novos Boost alone. And that ranges in price between, I believe, $32 for a subscription up to, I believe, $44 for a one time purchase of a month supply of Novos Boost. And Novos Boost contains one single very powerful ingredient called NMN, or nicotinamide mononucleotide, which has been made very popular by a number of scientists because of a lot of research, like Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard and others, because of all of the benefits that this single ingredient can have on increasing NAD, which is something involved in our energy production and DNA repair and so on. The third product is Novos Age. That's the biological age test that I mentioned before. It includes 3 different tests in it. It's a simple finger prick that you then spread on an index card, a little bit of blood, and then you mail that in. And we give you the DunedInPACE clock, which I mentioned before from Columbia and Duke University. It tells you your pace of aging. This is the most accurate, latest 3rd generation epigenetic test available. The second test is your biological age. We offer it to scratch the itch. A lot of people want to know how old they are biologically, but we caution that this is not nearly as accurate as the first test. So you can look at it, but don't rely too heavily on the result of that test. It's not perfectly accurate, and that goes for all biological age tests out there that are promising to tell you your age. And then the third is the telomere length, which I mentioned before. Telomeres are the ends of the chromosomes to protect your DNA. And for that, what you want to make sure is that they haven't gotten too short. If they're not in the lowest percentiles for your age, you're good. If you're like in the 40th, 50th percentile and above, you're fine, because there's no higher disease risk, according to the current science, from having telomeres of average length and so on. It's really just when they get very, very short that now the risk of things like gastrointestinal cancers go up. So it's really just for you to be aware of if yours happens to be short. And then we have a package where you can get a significant discount, I believe more than $500 discount for a year supply of Core, of Boost, and the age test. But that's for someone who's really, really decided that they want to make a transformation in their lives, and they invest in that package.
That's cool. So thanks for clarifying that, because, and thank you. It's so rare that I have guests that will just put the numbers out there. This is what it costs. And I don't know why people are afraid to say that, but they just don't. So thank you for doing that. I'm thinking about my boys, and they're handsome kids. They're young. They're in their 20s versus their dad and mom in the 50s versus their grandparents in the 70s. So is there somebody that should not consider this? I mean, what are there certain ages? Are there certain situations where, there should be caution? What's your thoughts on that?
Sure. So we technically start aging even as a fetus, as crazy as that sounds, right? Like scientists will argue as a fetus, the aging process begins, which is kind of depressing when you think of it that way. Um, but more practically speaking, where aging really starts to accelerate is after puberty. When we get all of these hormones, now the aging process, we start to see it advancing much more rapidly. But the question I ask is, when does disease risk really start to increase significantly? And unless you're like a very unhealthy person, we're seeing children getting diabetes now, unless you're someone like that, if you're relatively healthy, I would say late 20s to early 30s is when people should start taking longevity seriously in terms of their diet, their exercise, and their supplements, their lifestyle, and so on. If they get started earlier in their teens and 20s, great. That's good for them. They're on the right track, but it's not as important. It's not as powerful of an impact as it will be when you're older. So I would say, late 20s, early 30s is when you should start to consider it. Another thing I'd mention is that just like exercise or eating a healthy diet, the earlier you start, the better, but you're going to see more pronounced differences when you're older and less healthy. So
Right.
somebody who goes, from eating junk food to healthy food when they're 20 won't notice as much as someone who's 70 going from junk food to healthy food. They're going to see a major difference in how they feel, how they sleep, energy levels, and so on. So something just to keep in mind, depending on how old you are, you're more likely to see short-term benefits if you're older than if you're younger, but that doesn't mean it's not helping of course, you're investing in your future.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I was going to ask you next how long to take it. But before you answer that, I think that that's what this is all about. Rather, we're talking about making lifestyle changes, taking something that will add value. It's really about investing in yourself. But man, the cost of being sick is so high. Not just, I mean, I listen to the stories, even today in clinic, and I had a few people who had not been able to make lifestyle changes, and they end up having an event. And man, you can't, after that stroke, it's hard to go back and get what you had. You may get better, you may do pretty good. Maybe you're lucky and you have a TIA or mini stroke. But man, some people, they'll have these events and they'll never walk the same. They'll never maybe talk the same. They'll never be able to think the same. And just getting ahead of that is so important. And I think in 2023, you would hope that with the smart people in the world out there, and like you said, the research, a lot of this research had been done. You just had to go find it and figure out how to put it into one product. I would just hope that we would be smart enough to do better. And but while not forgetting how important it is to have a good lifestyle. Like there's no supplement that'll correct a horrible lifestyle. I mean, you gotta eat right and move your body and keep your stress down and get enough sleep. Do those basic things first. And if you do that, and then you add something to that to optimize, then it's pretty much a win-win. So let's go back to that question in terms of, my assumption is that you should start it and just keep taking it. But what do you tell people when they ask that question?
Yeah. So first, to echo what you're saying, I look at longevity as it's a pizza pie with multiple slices, right? A healthy cauliflower pizza pie or something, right? With multiple slices in it.
You better say
And
it.
and one of those slices is your physical activity. Another slice is sleep and stress reduction, like you say, right? So supplements are one of the slices in that pie. And I will never for a second claim that, Novos is the cure all and that you can get away without other healthy practices in your life. But we also need to be realistic. No one is going to be perfect at all of these different dimensions. And so if you are not as good with diet, well, being good with supplements might help to offset that. And if you're not good with physical activity, being good with diet might help to offset that, and so on. So think of this as a combinatorial approach. Like what are you good at? What are you not so good at? And what can you afford in terms of effort and financial budget? And then put that all together and see how you can maximize each one of these. To your question specifically about how long to take it for, I would say it's the same as these other concepts like good sleep and exercise and healthy diet. The longer you do it for, the better. If you eat healthy and you exercise for 5 years and then you stop, you're in a better place than the person who didn't exercise for 5 years. But
That's
you're
right.
not in as good of a place as the person who continued to exercise, right?
Right.
So it's all about, balancing and deciding what you're willing to commit to.
And
But
I
the first
and I
step is getting started,
You
right?
gotta get started. I'll be honest, and let me tell you what's cool. So Dr. Anthony Chafee is a well-known carnivore in that community, and he's like this big muscular guy.
Right.
And when I interviewed him, I was like, "So I'm thinking you're at the gym every day." He's like, "Yeah, sometimes I'll get there once a week." And now he's got muscle memory and this just happened to me. I had a procedure done on my hand. I wasn't really doing I used the exercise bands. And I was talking to a patient about the importance of exercise, and she didn't have any thigh muscles at all. So I said, touch my thigh. And I let her touch my thigh, and it was firm. And I was like, and then I realized I hadn't even exercised in like 3 or 4 weeks. So if we can just get moving, the benefits are off the chain. Being healthy may be a weird thing if you're not doing it right now, but man, once you get into that space and you get your body back in motion, you start eating well, everything just feels better. And I just really want to echo how important that is to my audience. And I'm a little different in low carb community because I tend to talk about a vaster array of subjects. I'm talking about relationships and organisms that cause harm, pollutants, and because that came from my functional medicine training. But the reason why I do that is because there's so many ways to heal and be healthy. And I want people to hear your message, the messages I share every week, and just figure out where it fits in their lives. And for some people, they'll hear this and say, I got to try this, want to live here, be here with my family. And for the next person, it was a curious thing. And they say, it was very interesting. And they don't act on it. But I'm just so thankful that I can have an audience that'll hear my voice, your voice today, and just open their minds to the potential of thinking outside the box. And that's what this is all about. So we want to keep you healthy so you can keep that whole biological, chronological thing going in the right direction, right? So my nest and rope, right? It talks about the nest is nutrition, exercise, less stress, more sleep. How we think, hopefully positive, not self-limiting, recovering from trauma if necessary. The rope to climb up to the nest talks about having healthy relationships, organisms and pollutants. We should avoid the ones that harm us. And then the E is for protecting our emotions and making sure our life experiences serve us. So when you think about your next 12 months, where do you plan to focus your attention so you can achieve your optimal health?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, I think so. So it's an interesting way that you frame all of this. I do like very much the relationships and emotions side of things. I think that being as focused as I am on my entrepreneurial journey, I
Yeah.
also uh, have moved. So I'm originally from New York, and I've moved, and so I'm not around as much family and friends. Though I am fortunate to have a girlfriend here. Uh, I think I need to focus more of my time and my energy towards building new relationships,
Yeah.
and which will then feed into the emotional side of life as well.
Yeah, I like that. And what's really cool about what you shared about the benefits of the product, a lot of those benefits allow you to have the bandwidth to do exactly that. So if you feel good
Yeah.
and like you said, when you talked about sleep, right? So if you're, getting enough sleep, then they won't stress you out. And then that
Right.
means that when you're interacting with your girlfriend, you're not just bringing her all the stress of the day. You're bringing, the Chris that she wants to see, and I
Right.
just love that. So I think it's all interconnected, and if we do a good job, we'll be successful. But I think you're right. I think all successful people have to pause for a minute and reassess what's really important, and all the success in the world, all the people that you help in the world are not. It's not going to mean as much if what you have at home is not really where it should be. So I really that resonates with me. So I'm going to definitely have a link in the notes going straight to your company. I've asked the company to provide that for me, and that's pending, but we'll get that. And then,
Sure.
but I also want to know, where else can people find you? I think you're not just at Novos, you're actually in social media somewhere. So where else can people find you?
Yes. So I have a website, slowmyage.com, where I
Okay.
share my own biological age results and other physiological markers of health. It's more for the geeks, us geeks out there who really want to dig into the numbers and the science behind it. And I then have an Instagram profile and a Twitter profile, also Slow My Age. And then, of course, novoslabs.com is the company. We've got tons of content, free content written by MDs and PhDs, scientifically based, scientifically referenced. And then, of course, Novos Labs on all of the social platforms.
Absolutely. So again, thank you so much. To me, this is very valuable work because bringing people to something that'll help them live longer and be here for their families is like gold. And I mean, you can't really measure that. But I just really, and I feel that way too, as I help people work towards metabolic health. And they do that. I just know that there's more time. There's more time to be with family, and the quality of that time is so much better. So I really appreciate you for joining me today, and it was a pleasure to get to know you, and I look forward to seeing you in the future as well. So take care, Chris.
Likewise. Thank you, Tony. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. So I hope today's conversation with Chris has provided you with some much needed insight about longevity, a subject that will gift all of us more time, to live our purpose and to be here with our family. A topic that continues to evolve. Clearly, I had no clue that Chris was going to bring up three additional mechanisms related to longevity. So I really think that reminds us that we need to be flexible in our beliefs, and be ready to change and adapt accordingly. So I just consider today's episode an introduction for some and a way to fill some knowledge gaps for others, just like Chris filled a little knowledge gap for me today as well. So if you're intrigued by Chris's company, make sure to check out the link that I'll have in the notes, and and just start working on yourself each and every day. I guarantee you, you'll get closer and closer to achieving your health-related goals if you're just willing to learn and then act on what you're learning. I appreciate everyone who comes to my channel every week. I'm humbled by it, and I will continue to deliver the best guests I can find. So until we have another episode of Protecting Your Nest podcast, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest. You've been listening to Protecting Your Nest with Dr. Tony Hampton. For more, visit drtonyhampton.com.